The federal courthouse in Chicago was a place where reputations were made and unmade, and on this particular morning, the air was thick with anticipation. The hearing was supposed to be a routine review of a high-profile civil rights case, but the presence of retired Judge Richard Posner, one of the most influential legal minds of the last half-century, guaranteed that nothing about the day would be ordinary. Posner, known for his razor-sharp intellect and his willingness to challenge even the most seasoned attorneys, had agreed to moderate a public forum on the future of constitutional litigation. The event had drawn a crowd of law students, journalists, and legal scholars, all eager to witness a clash of ideas. At the center of the room sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, a first-term congresswoman from Texas whose meteoric rise had already made waves in legal and political circles. Crockett was no stranger to high-stakes litigation. Before her election to Congress, she had built a reputation as a relentless civil rights attorney, winning cases that others deemed unwinnable and refusing to back down from powerful adversaries. Her victories in court had earned her respect, but also skepticism from those who believed her rapid ascent was more about politics than legal acumen. As the forum began, Posner wasted no time. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Crockett, and asked the question that everyone in the room had been waiting for. Representative Crockett, you've been described as a rising star in both law and politics. But some critics say your courtroom experience is overstated, that your victories are more symbolic than substantive. What do you say to those who question whether you have the credentials to shape national policy on civil rights? The question hung in the air, sharp and direct. Crockett didn't flinch. She met Posner's gaze, her voice calm but resolute. Judge Posner, I appreciate the question. I've heard it before from opposing counsel, from political opponents, even from some in my own party. But I believe credentials are earned in the trenches, not just in the classroom or the halls of power. My record is public. Every case I've argued, every brief I've filed, every verdict I've won, it's all there for anyone to see. Posner raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Let's talk specifics. You've cited your work in Martinez v. Texas Department of Public Safety as a landmark? But wasn't that case ultimately decided on procedural grounds? Crockett smiled, anticipating the challenge. The procedural ruling was only part of the story. The real impact of Martinez was in the precedent it set for pattern or practice investigations at the state level. Our team developed a framework that has since been cited in federal courts across the country. The Fifth Circuit upheld our approach, and the Supreme Court referenced our arguments in subsequent decisions. That's not just a technical win, that's a shift in how civil rights cases are litigated. The audience leaned in, sensing that this was more than a routine exchange. Posner pressed on. But some would argue that real change comes from legislative action, not courtroom victories. How do you respond to critics who say you're more comfortable in front of a judge than in the messy world of policymaking? Crockett's answer was immediate. I don't see a divide between the courtroom and the legislature. The law is a living thing. What happens in court shapes what happens in Congress and vice versa. My experience as a litigator taught me how to build a case, how to marshal evidence, how to anticipate and counter arguments. Those are the same skills I use every day in Congress, whether I'm drafting a bill, negotiating with colleagues, or questioning witnesses in committee. Posner nodded, conceding the point. Fair enough. But let's address the elephant in the room. Some of your critics say your victories are more about optics than outcomes, that you pick cases for their media value, not their legal significance. Crockett's tone sharpened, but she remained composed. I pick cases where the law is failing real people. If those cases attract media attention, it's because the issues matter. But look at the outcomes. In the last 5 years, I've won settlements that forced police departments to change their use of force policies. I've secured injunctions that protected voting rights in communities that would have been disenfranchised. I've argued before appellate courts and won decisions that are now cited as precedent in law schools across the country. That's not optics. That's impact. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the audience. Posner, ever the skeptic, tried one last time to poke a hole in her narrative. But what about the cases you lost? Every lawyer has them. How do you explain those to the people who look to you for leadership? Crockett didn't hesitate. I've lost cases. Every good lawyer has. But I've never lost sight of why I fight. Every loss taught me something about the law, about strategy, about resilience. And in some cases, a loss in court led to a win in the legislature or in public opinion. The point isn't to win every battle. The point is to keep fighting for justice, no matter the odds. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Posner, for the first time, seemed at a loss for words. He glanced down at his notes, then back at Crockett, as if searching for a new angle. But the dynamic had shifted. Crockett was no longer on the defensive. She was setting the terms of the debate, the moderator. Sensing the shift in energy, opened the floor to questions from the audience. A law student in the front row stood up, her voice trembling with excitement. Representative Crockett, can you talk about a case where you faced overwhelming odds and still managed to win? What did you learn from that experience? Crockett nodded, her expression thoughtful. Absolutely. One case that stands out is Johnson v. City of Dallas. It was a wrongful arrest and excessive force case involving a young black man who had been stopped without cause and injured during the arrest. The city's legal team was formidable. They had resources, political connections, and a strategy to drag the case out until my client gave up. But we didn't back down. We gathered video evidence, found witnesses who had been afraid to come forward, and built a coalition of community support. The city offered a settlement, but my client wanted his day in court. We went to trial, and not only did we win, but the verdict forced the Dallas Police Department to overhaul its training and disciplinary procedures. That case taught me that the law can be a tool for real change, but only if you're willing to fight for it, even when the odds are against you. The audience applauded, and even Posner seemed impressed. He leaned forward, his tone less adversarial. That's an impressive result. But let's talk about the broader implications. How do you ensure that these victories aren't just isolated incidents, but part of a larger movement for justice? Crockett smiled. That's the challenge, isn't it? One case can change a life, but a movement changes the system. After Johnson, we worked with local lawmakers to pass new oversight measures for the police department. We partnered with advocacy groups to push for statewide reforms. And we made sure the media covered not just the verdict, but the policy changes that followed. My approach has always been to use each victory as a springboard, to build momentum, to educate the public, and to inspire others to take up the fight. Posner nodded, acknowledging the strategy. You've clearly thought about the long game. But let's return to your critics. Some say that your courtroom style, direct, sometimes confrontational, doesn't translate well to the collaborative world of Congress. How do you respond? Crockett's answer was candid. Collaboration is essential, but so is clarity. In Congress, as in court, you have to know when to negotiate and when to stand your ground. I've worked across the aisle on criminal justice reform, voting rights, and infrastructure. But I've also called out colleagues, Democrat and Republican, when they put politics above people. My courtroom experience taught me to be fearless, but it also taught me to listen, to build coalitions, and to find common ground where I can. A senior attorney in the audience raised his hand. Representative Crockett, you've mentioned your appellate work. Can you share an example of a case where your arguments changed the law, not just the outcome? Crockett nodded. Certainly. In Ramirez v. Texas Board of Elections, we challenged a set of voter ID laws that disproportionately affected minority voters. The lower court ruled against us, but we appealed to the Fifth Circuit. Our argument was that the law, as applied, violated both the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause. The appellate court agreed, and their decision not only struck down the law but set a precedent that has been cited in similar cases across the country. That's the kind of impact I strive for, wins that ripple outward, changing the legal landscape for everyone. Posner, now fully engaged, asked, how do you balance the demands of your legal work with your responsibilities as a legislator? Isn't there a risk of spreading yourself too thin? Crockett's response was measured. It's a challenge, no doubt, but I see my roles as complementary, not competing. My legal background informs my legislative work, and my experience in Congress gives me a broader perspective on the issues that come before the courts. I have a great team, both in my district and in D.C., and we work together to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. At the end of the day, my goal is the same in both arenas: to fight for justice and to make the law work for everyone, not just the privileged few. A young journalist, notebook in hand, asked Representative Crockett, "What advice would you give to aspiring lawyers who want to make a difference but feel intimidated by the system?" Crockett's eyes softened. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. The law can be intimidating, but it's also a tool for change. Find mentors, build your network, and never stop learning. Most importantly, remember why you started. Every case, every client, every argument is a chance to make a difference. And don't be afraid to lose. Some of my most important lessons came from setbacks, not victories." The moderator glanced at Posner, who seemed to be reflecting on Crockett's answers. He turned to her one last time. "Representative Crockett, you've answered every question with substance and candor. But let me ask you this. What do you see as your greatest legacy? Your courtroom victories, your legislative achievements, or something else?" Crockett paused, considering the question. "I hope my legacy is that I never stopped fighting for what's right. Whether in court or in Congress, I want to be remembered as someone who stood up for the voiceless, who challenged the status quo, and who used every tool at her disposal to make the system more just. The victories matter, but so does the example you set for those who come after you." The room was silent, the audience hanging on her words. Even Posner, known for his skepticism, seemed genuinely moved. He set his notes aside, conceding the floor to a woman whose credentials were no longer in question. As the forum drew to a close, the energy in the courthouse was transformed. What had begun as a subtle interrogation of Jasmine Crockett's credentials had become a showcase of her depth, resilience, and vision. The audience, a mix of aspiring lawyers, seasoned practitioners, and policy wonks, lingered in the aisles, eager to shake her hand or ask for a word of advice. Even Judge Posner, whose reputation for intellectual rigor was matched only by his skepticism, seemed to have been won over not by rhetoric, but by the undeniable weight of Crockett's record and her ability to articulate the stakes of every case she touched. A final question came from a professor of constitutional law, her voice carrying across the room. "Representative Crockett, in an era when public trust in the legal system is at a low point, how do you restore faith in the courts and in the rule of law?" Crockett took a breath, her answer deliberate. "Restoring faith starts with transparency and accountability. People need to see that the law is not just for the powerful, but for everyone. That means holding institutions accountable when they fail, but also celebrating when they get it right. It means making the process accessible, explaining decisions, demystifying the system, and inviting the public into the conversation. I try to do that in every case, every hearing, every speech. The law should not be a fortress. It should be a bridge." The professor nodded, satisfied. The moderator thanked the panel, but the applause was reserved for Crockett. As the crowd dispersed, Posner approached her, his demeanor less formal than before. "You know, Representative, I've spent my career questioning assumptions and challenging credentials. Today you reminded me that the best credentials are earned in the arena, not just in the academy." Crockett smiled, accepting the compliment. "Thank you, Judge. I've always believed that the law is a living thing. It's shaped by those who are willing to fight for it, to test its limits, and to make it work for the people who need it most." As Crockett left the courthouse, her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from colleagues, invitations to speak at law schools, requests for interviews. But what mattered most to her were the notes from young lawyers and law students who had watched the forum online. "You made me believe I could do this," one wrote. "Thank you for showing us that justice is possible." In the weeks that followed, Crockett's influence only grew. Her victories in court became case studies in law schools across the country. Her legislative proposals gained traction, with colleagues from both parties seeking her input on criminal justice reform, voting rights, and police accountability. She was invited to testify before congressional committees, to advise advocacy groups, and to mentor the next generation of legal minds, but Crockett never lost sight of her roots. She continued to take on pro bono cases, to visit community centers, and to listen to the people whose stories had shaped her own. She knew that every victory, no matter how small, was part of a larger struggle for justice. And she understood that the real measure of her work was not in headlines or accolades, but in the lives she helped change. Judge Posner, reflecting on the forum in a column for a leading legal journal, wrote, "Jasmine Crockett's career is a testament to the enduring power of advocacy. She has shown that the law is not static but dynamic, capable of responding to new challenges and of being shaped by those with the courage to challenge its boundaries. Her court victories are not just personal triumphs. They are milestones in the ongoing evolution of American justice." The impact of the forum rippled outward. Law students who had once doubted their place in the profession now saw a path forward. Practicing attorneys were reminded of the importance of preparation, persistence, and purpose. And policymakers, watching from afar, recognized that the future of the law would be shaped not just by those who wrote it, but by those who dared to test it in the crucible of real life. For Crockett, the journey was far from over. She knew that every case, every bill, every debate was another opportunity to push the law closer to its promise of justice for all. She welcomed the challenges ahead, confident that her credentials earned in courtrooms, in communities, and in Congress would speak for themselves. As she walked out into the Chicago afternoon, the city alive with possibility, Crockett felt a sense of resolve. She had faced one of the sharpest legal minds in the country and left him, if not speechless, then certainly thoughtful. More importantly, she had left a roomful of future lawyers inspired to believe that their own victories, no matter how hard won, could change the world.